Welcome to the University of Virginia's College at Wise. My name is Donna Henry, and I'm the Chancellor here at the college, and I'm so pleased to see all of you out for this important day. Our Office of Economic Development and Engagement, including our Healthy Appalachia Institute, is committed to our region. We're committed to working in collaboration and partnership with organizations that improve the health, education, and economic development of far southwest Virginia. We hope that today's event will emphasize the importance of collaboration and partnership across the sectors to address challenges related to black lung disease in our region. And today we hope to bring attention and awareness to black lung disease and to increase awareness of progressive massive fibrosis in central Appalachia. We also hope that this brings awareness and attention to the positive and dedicated work that's happening in our region to address these challenges, along with other issues related to health outcomes and our economy. This Thursday, in fact, we're hosting our third annual Southwest Virginia Economic Forum, which will be held right here on our campus in our Convocation Center. UVA-Wise has led a planning team with participants from across the state, and we anticipate over 400 people coming to the forum on Thursday. We will be focused on and talking about the future of Southwest Virginia, and specifically looking at this year's theme of talent and workforce. So we'll be excited to welcome Governor Northam on Thursday morning, who will open the forum, and I think that demonstrates the interest of the folks in Richmond for what's happening in rural Virginia, and particularly in Southwest Virginia. There is a flyer in your folders if you're interested in coming on Thursday. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ron Carson, who until recently served as the Black Lung Program Director and currently serves as the Program Advisor for Stone Mountain Health Services, while continuing to provide training, serve as media liaison, offer benefits counseling and lay advocacy, and performs outreach in the community. Mr. Carson continues to advise Congress and the National Coalition of Black Lung and Respiratory Disease Clinics. He served in various roles for the HRSA, including peer review trainer, consultant, and objective review committee for the Federal Black Lung Program, and he has presented at educational sessions at the National Black Lung Conference for almost 20 years. Mr. Carson is co-author of the 2018 article in JAMA on progressive massive fibrosis. In the spring of 2018, he received the congressional recognition for his career serving minors with black lung. So it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Carson.
I don't know who she's talking about. But anyway, it's an honor and pleasure to be here today to see all the faces that I know, most of them. But anyway, we want to start out with a short video, okay, of Senator Mark Warner.
Hi, I'm Senator Mark Warner. The conversations you're having today about the outbreak of complicated black lung are incredibly important. While I'm not able to be with you in person, I know that Shane Clem from my office is with you, and I'm eager to hear what he reports back on. The unprecedented scale of this PMF cluster means we all need to work together, and I'm encouraged that you've convened such a comprehensive group of experts and advocates, as well as minors and their families. I was just in Wise this past weekend for commencement, and while I was in town, I heard directly from minors and members of the community who are being impacted by this complicated black lung outbreak. And I want you to all know that this is a personal priority for me. In the Senate, I've introduced legislation to help speed up and improve claims processing for black lung cases. And along with Senator Kane and Senator Manchin and others, I've written to the Secretary of Labor urging him to keep the respirable dust rule in place. But frankly, I expect there's more work we can do for our minors affected by this public health emergency. So here's the one thing I'll ask of you. If you're not getting the federal support you need, or if there are more ways my office can help your efforts on the ground, please let me know, and let Shane know so we can get to work. Again, thanks for the important work that you're doing on this issue, and I look forward to hearing the results of this discussion. Thanks so much.
I want to thank Senator Warner, Senator Tim Kaine, Congressman Morgan Griffith, and Congressman Bobby Scott for the unceasing interest in and response of this ever-growing health issue plaguing this region and maybe the country, and for expressing the need of government intervention for recently our $3.7 million plus up that we received for the Federal Black Lung Clinic program. But behind every great leader, you have great people working for you. So today I want to recognize Shane Clem, who works for Senator Mark Warner. I want to recognize Laura Blevins from Senator Tim Kaine's office. Laura's not here. Okay. Michelle Jenkins from Congressman Rick Boucher's, Congressman Marcus Riverside. And I also want to recognize Congressman Bobby Scott and Richard Miller, who was part of this process that we are here today. I also want to recognize our media. Specifically Howard Burkus of NPR. Howard put this out there, and we've been saying this for many, many, many years, that we are seeing something different that's not going on. So Howard took it, once NIOSH validated it, Howard Burkus was a big help in putting it out there. Now there are various media outlets in this room, and I would encourage all minors and their family members to talk to these people. We want the country to know what is going on with this terrible disease. I also want to recognize NIOSH, who's here today and will be coming up shortly, because without NIOSH, I don't think this would be possible. Once, like I said earlier, they validated what we have been seeing in this area for many, many, many years. And Scott Laney, Dr. Blakely, Kyra, they came down and spent many, many hours, days and weeks in St. Charles working on this PMF epidemic. So thank you very much for the work that you have done. And I also want to recognize two people that I have worked with for the past 10, 15 years on a personal basis, and that's Dr. Esther Jarapu and Dr. Kathy DuPont. We have traveled the country together. We have been on many TV programs together, putting the word out on this PMF, so thank you very, very much. I want to recognize the Stone Mountain Black Lung staff. Will you please stand? These are truly, truly the A-team in the black lung world. They have done so much in screening, diagnosing, treatment, education, rehab, benefits counseling, labor representation. They are the real deal in the full package. So we really thank them a whole lot. I want to thank the new black lung director, Dr. Worth, Dr. Jim Worth, who has made my 28 years retirement very sweet, because I know this program is moving forward and going to a whole new level. So Dr. Worth, thank you so much for stepping in and carrying out this tradition. Okay? There are going to be some breakout sessions going on here today, and you want to come and tell me a little bit about the room numbers? I don't have those here, Doc.
So we'll be, after this session, we'll have an opening session with the NIOSH folks, Dr. Crum, and then we'll have an interview. Then we'll break out into 3 different sessions. If you're interested in medical, X-ray, and legal from more of a professional perspective, then that'll be over in the auditorium. If you're interested in quality of life, maximizing quality of life, then that'll stay in here. And if you're interested in public health, then that'll be down that hall in room 108. There'll be more of a discussion this will be a presentation in here. There'll be more discussion of public health in that room. Then in the second breakout session, if you're interested in medical or X-ray from more of a general public perspective, that will be in this room. And legal from a public perspective will be down in 108. And if you're interested in benefits counseling, then that will be upstairs, just at the top of the stairs. My warning to you is that in the worst of all timing, yesterday the elevator broke. So if you're going to have trouble with the stairs, going upstairs, let us know and we'll try and figure something out for you on that. If you have questions, we'll be available to point you in the right directions. And thank you all for coming.
And with that being said, I would like to bring the NIOSH team up. Kyra.
Great, thanks Ron. So much thanks to Jim and Ron for inviting us here to speak about an issue that is really near and dear to our heart. I'm here with my colleagues David Blackley and Scott Laney from NIOSH. You've already heard from Ron, who we've worked with very closely. And you'll hear from Dr. Brandon Crum, who is a radiologist out of Pikeville, Kentucky. Today we're going to talk to you about the resurgence of black lung in Appalachian coal miners. So without further ado, get started. So coal mine dust causes a spectrum of lung diseases that are collectively termed coal mine dust lung disease, or CMDLD. These include coal workers pneumoconiosis, silicosis, mixed dust pneumoconiosis, dust-related diffuse fibrosis, which can be mistaken for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. Today we're going to focus mainly on the diseases that are listed above that can be identified by an X-ray. So basically that's everything here but COPD. But before I begin, let me say that there are a lot of terms out there that refer to the same or similar diseases arising from respirable coal mine dust exposure, and the same term can have different definitions depending on the setting that you're looking at. So for the purposes of today's talk, coal workers pneumoconiosis, which is abbreviated CWP, pneumoconiosis and black lung are all the same thing, and I'll show you what they look like in just a minute. So what does coal mining look like? This is what coal mining in central Appalachia, mainly in Harlan County, looked like in 1920. So this is a photo from a Harlan County, Kentucky coal miner in the 1920s. This is a photo taken in the 1970s in a Kentucky coal mine. You can see the timbers here are used as roof support. And today, this is what mining looks like in central Appalachia. It's still dirty, but the mechanization has really increased. So now coal mining is highly automated and highly productive. This photo is from a longwall mine in Pennsylvania. The miners here are standing under huge jacks that are designed to support the roof. You can see them over here. Or sorry, the miners are over here. And then mine inspectors are actually looking at the cutting equipment here as it's idle. So the coal that's mined here by these miners and the machines eventually makes it to the surface where it's pushed around and either put on haul trucks or loaded on rail cars or river barges or a combination of all three in order to make it to its final destination, which is likely a power plant. Because of increased mechanization, overall employment has declined in the coal mining industry. However, production continues to steadily increase into the last decade. So as of 2017, there were nearly 53,000 coal miners employed in the US, and you can compare that to the early 1920s where there were nearly 700,000. So you may ask, I'm from Northern Virginia, which is pretty far for any coal mines, or I don't know anyone who's a coal miner, so why should I care about coal? Historically speaking, coal has fueled the industrial revolution, which then paved the way for many of the modern innovations that we rely upon today. And the reason that we should still care about coal today is because much of our electricity grid, especially here in Appalachia, is coal-based. We burn the coal to boil water, which creates steam that then turns a turbine that generates electricity that's then transmitted to your home so you can charge your iPhone at night. So 30% of the US electricity today actually still comes from coal. 4 to 5 years ago, this number was around 40%, so it's a bit higher. This change represents a change in the energy market, mainly due to the abundance of cheap natural gas. Where we live in West Virginia, in Morgantown, over 94% of our electricity comes from coal. In Kentucky, it's 83%, and in Virginia, it's 16%. So here's a map of the main coal mining regions here in the US. Lignite, there's different types of coal, and lignite coal is the softer coal that's found in the areas that are shaded in yellow and pale orange on this map. Various types of bituminous coal, which is the harder type of coal that's mined here in Appalachia, is found in the areas that are shaded in the green, or various shades of green, and blue-gray. And anthracite coal, which is a hard coal and the highest carbon content, it's hard to see on this map, but it's mainly mined here in these small slivers in northeastern Pennsylvania. So as of last year, Wyoming was the top coal-producing state in the US, followed by West Virginia. And overall, between 2016 and 2017, there was actually an 8% increase in coal production in the United States. So here are the coal fields in your backyard in southwest Virginia. They're shaded here in blue. It's mainly Wise, Buchanan, and Dickinson County, and a little bit into Lee. Here are a few examples of some exposed coal seams, and you may have noticed these if you drive on the interstate highways, which have been cut through the Appalachian Mountains. The top left is a small seam which is contaminated with iron, sitting on a bed of solid quartz. Below that is a brown lignite seam that was exposed when the road here was being put through a mountain in Colorado. And on the right, we see a nice clean seam of bituminous coal. This one happens to be from southern West Virginia. In the past, it was not advantageous in any way to mine outside the coal seam or to mine that geological material that was above and below the coal seam. Coal is soft, and the rock that surrounds the coal seam is hard. So getting into the rock with the cutting machines wears the bits faster than normal. Also, you can't burn rock for electricity. So if you send it out of the mine, it has to be cleaned and picked out and treated as mine tailing waste. And you really don't want to do that. However, because the large seams of coal in the US have generally been mined out, seams are getting thinner and thinner, and technology now exists to remove the rock from the coal when it leaves the mine. We're pretty certain that current mines are mining not only the coal, but the surrounding geological material as well, and substantial amounts of it. We've heard of some estimates of mines taking between 30 and 50% rock. Coal mining in Appalachia can take many forms, as I'm sure you all know. Underground mining, which is on this side, mainly over here, can involve dropping a shaft straight down into the earth, several hundred feet, which is then essentially creating an elevator for people and coal. Driving a slope at an angle to get to the more shallow coal seams is also common. And drift mining, which is essentially driving straight into the side of the mountain as the coal seam is accessible from the valley. Surface mining is also a common practice, more reliant upon large equipment and drilling and blasting. Mountaintop removal is very common in central Appalachia and employs a significantly less number of miners compared to underground mining. So why should we care about the dust generated during coal mining? I've told you why you should care about coal and a little bit about coal mining, but now why should we care about the dust? Before I go much further, I want to emphasize that black lung is only caused by coal mine dust. Its onset is associated with the length of exposure, and its severity of disease is dependent upon the amount of dust inhaled, the years of exposure, and the combination and composition of dust. There's no association with race, sex, age, or smoking status. This is a section of a healthy lung. And you can compare simple CWP or simple black lung to that healthy lung. Here you can see that small coal macules have started to form in the lung on your right here. Progressive massive fibrosis, abbreviated PMF, is the most severe form of black lung. These are two sections of lungs from miners with PMF. You can see that the lungs are nearly taken over with fibrotic tissue. For example, the lung on the right is from a miner from 2007. It's from an autopsy. This miner worked for 27 years in the coal mining industry. A large portion of the upper lobe is completely consumed by scar tissue, and the rest of his lungs shows severe amounts of damage as well. So again, here's a healthy lung, simple CWP in the center, and the worst form, PMF, on the right. Whole lung pathology, postmortem, or after death, would be the gold standard for black lung diagnosis. And in some cases, postmortem diagnosis is an important thing for things like compensation and disease pathology research. But it's a pretty poor standard if we're talking about public health intervention and prevention. So we use imaging studies, or chest x-rays, primarily, and increasingly we also use pulmonary physiology. Biopsies are usually only used to rule out cancer, and the most important thing for an initial diagnosis for these patients is an occupational history. Something that is actually lacking in many of the younger miners in this area with severe pneumoconiosis. So for our epidemiological purposes, we use chest x-rays. This is an example of a miner receiving a chest x-ray. In order to standardize the disease classifications, we use a system that is developed by the World Health Organization's International Labor Office, or ILO, for classifying the chest x-rays. Physicians must be trained and demonstrate competence in the ILO system in order to classify radiographs of coal miners in the US. These physicians are called B-readers. This is an example of a data collection sheet which a physician uses to record classification information from a miner's chest radiograph. And so I'll walk you through how the ILO classification works. This is a 0-0, so this is a normal chest x-ray. And then the next major category is a 1-1, so this is an example of simple CWP. And 2-2 is also simple CWP. 3-3 is the last stage of CWP, or the last stage of simple CWP, before we get into complicated. And then there are stages in between from 0 to 3. The next is PMF. This is the first stage of PMF. It's category A. Then there's category B and category C. So for some comparisons, I'll show you some slides of the pathology and then the x-ray side by side. These are examples of healthy lungs. This isn't exactly this person's lung side by side, but it is an example of what that person's lung would look like on chest x-ray. This is simple CWP. This is category 2 here in the chest x-ray. And this is the most severe form, progressive massive fibrosis.
I'll get back to you.
In 1968, the Consol No. 9 mine disaster occurred in Farmington, West Virginia, just 25 miles away from our office in Morgantown. 78 miners were killed. This was the first large disaster that was covered on national television and was a major catalyst for the 1969 Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act. In 1969, miners in West Virginia organized a strike, and this strike occurred in February of that year and sparked massive walkouts throughout the coal fields in southern West Virginia. The miners were protesting to get black lung recognized by law as a compensable disease. The movement escalated to the point at which 40,000 miners stopped work in the coal fields of West Virginia during 1969. And the strikes led to Governor Arch Moore signing a bill which allowed compensation for the miners with black lung. The media from these strikes led to a nationwide acknowledgement of the health issue, and in response, the U.S. Congress passed the Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act, which was signed into law by President Nixon. This law assisted miners across the nation suffering from black lung. The goal from the act was to protect the health and safety of the nation's coal miners. A couple key provisions of the act was that it established a permissible exposure limit for dust, and it empowered NIOSH to conduct routine health surveillance on active coal miners through the Coworkers Health Surveillance Program, or CWHSP. So that's the program that we run, the CWHSP. It operates under a Code of Federal Regulations, which provides the specifications for medical examinations of coal miners. And as part of the surveillance program, coal miners are offered periodic chest x-rays and are confidentially informed of their results. Participation is voluntary, and if miners are found to have black lung, they're offered the opportunity to transfer to a less dusty environment in the mine. So our goal with the program is to identify early signs of disease and stop it from progressing to disabling disease by providing health information to miners in the hopes that they will be able to act upon it. We also use the program to monitor disease patterns over time through our ongoing surveillance activities. Increasingly, we don't just use the CWHSP for surveillance. We have a mobile unit that's pictured here that we travel all over the country to coal mining regions to bring miners health screenings to the mine or the miners' community. We've looked at state and federal disability compensation programs to look at disease trends, and we've looked into accident and injury reporting systems that are mandated by federal regulatory agencies. We've recently started monitoring the trends in lung transplantations as well, and mortalities from black lung, as well as reporting on the experiences of clinical service providers like what Ron has had, and you'll hear from Brandon Crum here in a minute. Here's the long version of where we are now. Over the last 10 to 15 years, our group has demonstrated an increase in prevalence, severity, rapid onset, and rapid progression of disease. Geographic clustering and higher disease prevalence associated with specific geographic regions, associated with smaller mines, and associated with lower coal seam height has been documented. We've also documented severe disease in surface miners, higher prevalence of respiratory impairment among former and retired miners, and we've done specific studies with chest radiograph characteristics which suggest that silica exposure is an issue. Or, as it was put plainly by the staff from the Appalachian Citizens Law Center, black lung among Appalachian coal miners is quite literally worse than ever before. Here's the general trend of black lung nationwide since NIOSH started keeping track in the 1970s. Prevalence of disease declined among all tenure groups, with the prevalence of black lung dipping to less than 5% among the longer tenured miners in the late 90s. So the longer tenured miners are in the solid black line. Around 2000, for nearly all tenures, the prevalence started increasing. This increase was even more drastic in central Appalachian states of Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. So this graph just shows data through 2017 from those three states, where over 20% of longer tenure miners who were screened have black lung. These are only working miners. Nearly all of these miners with 25 or more years of tenure started working after the protective dust regulations that I just mentioned were put in place in the early 1970s. The previous graph that I showed you was any type of black lung. This graph shows the prevalence of just the most severe form of black lung, progressive massive fibrosis, in central Appalachia through 2014. So as a reminder, this is what we're talking about when we say PMF. This is severe disease. In 2017, we went back and updated that graph for PMF prevalence in central Appalachia, and we actually had to extend the scale. PMF prevalence is higher now than at any point since we started keeping track. Not only are we seeing an increase in prevalence of PMF, but the disease is progressing to PMF in less time than we've previously seen. For example, this paper we published last year, 14% of cases progressed from a normal chest x-ray to PMF in less than 10 years. In the ILO classification system that I walked you through just a few minutes ago, an expert x-ray readers classify the shape and the size of the small opacities, or those small scar tissues that are visible on the chest radiograph. R-type opacities are an indicator of silicosis, and this is based upon studies where they correlate x-ray classifications with lung biopsy and autopsy results. So if our hypothesis is that more rock around the coal seam is being cut, then we might expect a change in the radiographs that we are seeing to be more suggestive of silica and quartz exposure. Respirable crystalline silica is much more toxic to the lung tissue compared to coal dust. This is an example of R-type opacities in a roof bolter who likely had high levels of silica exposure when drilling through the roof of the coal mine. Note the small rounded lesions that appear throughout his radiograph. When we looked at the change in percentages of radiographs with R-type opacities over time, we didn't see much change in most of the US. That's the gray bars here. So there wasn't much change from the 80s, 90s through to 2000. But in Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia, we saw nearly an 8-fold increase from the 80s to the 2000s, indicating that silica exposure may be a contributing factor in the increase of disease prevalence in Central Appalachia. And we aren't just seeing disease among underground coal miners. Recently, we reported on surface miners with disease. We reached out to a few surface coal miners, who had participated in our surveillance and had PMF. And they had only been surface coal miners, so they had never worked underground. One of the miners took photos of his working conditions throughout his career and shared them with us. The top 2 photos were taken in the 80s, and the bottom 2 in 2012, right before he retired. He was a driller and blaster for his entire career, and these photos demonstrate the work in and around the drilling rig during the drilling and blasting process. So you can see the dusty conditions did not seem to improve from the 80s to 2012, at least for this miner. These are his chest radiographs. He received a chest radiograph at the age of 46, which is panel A here. It did not have evidence of pneumoconiosis. His surveillance radiograph at the age of 57 was classified as small opacity perfusion category 2-1, so category 2, with category A PMF, the first stages of PMF. He had progressed from a normal chest x-ray to PMF in 11 years and was forced to retire at the age of 57 because of extreme shortness of breath. NIOSH's surveillance program has a legal mandate to screen active miners. It only sees a sliver of the disease caused by coal mining. Therefore, to understand more about the disease among coal miners, our group and others have started looking at other sources of data outside of our surveillance program. Here we've looked at claims data from the Department of Labor, who operates the federal black lung compensation program, where coal miners are totally disabled, can apply for a small stipend and medical coverage. And the shaded background is the average number of coal miners in the US plotted over time. The black line is the number of miners filing for benefits who had PMF. You can see that the number of miners with PMF has steadily increased since the 1990s, even though coal mine employment has generally decreased. So you might say that what we're seeing in the previous graph is because coal mine employment has decreased. But many out-of-work coal miners may be applying for benefits. However, this graph in the gray demonstrates that the number of claimants filing for black lung benefits has remained generally consistent since the 1980s, but the percent of those claimants having PMF has increased exponentially. This graph demonstrates what we observe when we look at data from the National Organ Transplant Registry. We searched the medical information that they had on transplant recipients for any mention of pneumoconiosis. We found that the first lung transplant listing black lung as a primary diagnosis occurred in 1996. And since then, the occurrence has increased with an average of 5 transplants occurring per year over the last 10 years. This doesn't count the number of individuals who were still on the transplant list because of black lung. Additionally, the registry data isn't designed to capture occupational information, so it's likely that transplants with diagnoses of other diseases like idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis are occurring in coal miners, and we aren't able to capture it from this data. We compared the rate of lung transplants for black lung relative to all other lung transplants among adults, and the rates of CWP, or black lung transplants, have increased nearly 3-fold during the last 10 years. For us, this work is personal. This is Chester Pike. He was a coal miner for about 30 years in northern West Virginia. His family owned a Christmas tree farm right outside of Morgantown, where many folks at NIOSH brought their families to buy Christmas trees. His family is friends with several members of our team, and Chester graciously agreed to be filmed for an educational video that NIOSH created, and this photo was taken during that production of that video. He has now become the poster miner for the push to end black lung from MSHA. Chester endured a double lung transplant at the age of 60 after developing PMF as a coal miner. This is his explanted lung that he donated so that further pathological study of black lung could occur. Chester unfortunately died later that year from complications of his lung transplant. The return of black lung has been highlighted in the local and national news for the past few years. However, if you read one article, block out half a day and read this one. This is a series that won the Pulitzer Prize in 2014 for investigative journalism. This piece really describes the struggle of miners and their families. In 2014, MSHA announced a lower permissible standard for respirable coal mine dust, and a number of additional provisions were part of the new regulations as well, including extending surveillance formally to surface miners who previously were not included in the program, as well as breathing tests and symptom assessments. It's really too early to know whether these added protections will decrease the levels of PMF we're seeing in U.S. coal miners, unfortunately. So shifting gears, I'd like to tell you two stories from the last year and a half. Since 2014, we continue to find more and more disease and more severe disease everywhere we look. To put the next few stories into perspective, I'll tell you that in our surveillance program over the last 10 to 15 years, or in that blue box, we've observed a little over 100 cases of PMF among working coal miners. In 2016, my colleagues seated over here attended a small conference that we normally attend every year. Many of you in this room have been to that conference. It's a meeting of an eclectic group of people who all work in black lung, mainly in West Virginia. The meeting is held at Pike State Park, where that little red dot in southern West Virginia is. Physicians, respiratory therapists, lawyers, black lung advocates, researchers, representatives from federal and state governments, as well as public health officials, current and former coal miners, and their families all attend. A radiologist, who you'll hear from in a minute, approached our team and said he'd been seeing a great deal of PMF cases at his small clinic in Kentucky. So we went to Pikeville to meet with the radiologist to see what he was talking about. What we found was published in the MMWR, which is a CDC journal, a few months later, and Dr. Brandon Crum, the radiologist who raised the issue to NIOSH, is here to share our findings. And now I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Thanks, Kara. I really appreciate you guys having me here. It's an honor to be here. So like Kara was saying, I was seeing some things in my clinic that was worrisome over in Kentucky, and that's Pikeville, we're United Medical Group. We've got a fairly small to moderate sized clinic. We've got our own x-ray machine. So we image miners from a lot of different places. They'll come in and they'll get imaged. Some of them are from attorneys, some of them are for coal companies, some of them are in the NIOSH program, some of them are just wanting to come in and see if they have black lung or they don't. So we image quite a few men, but at that time I told them that I was concerned because I was seeing, a lot more complicated black lung than the statistics were out there that there actually was, and also I was seeing a lot of black lung, especially in younger people, which was very, very concerning to me, and the extent of it, and I've got some specific examples of that I'll show you guys in just a minute. The case definition at that time for the study, an ILO interpretation of a large opacity category A, B, or C was obtained in a coal miner who received an x-ray from the clinic there in Pikeville, or my clinic, during January 7, 2015 to August 17, 2016. With completed x-ray classification sheet and completed occupational history form. And over the last 3 to 4 years, when a miner comes in and he has an x-ray at my clinic, the technician will tell me when the x-ray is done, and I'll try to look at all the x-rays before they actually leave the clinic so I can get a sense of what we're actually looking at. And if those x-rays are bad, meaning they have bad simple black lung disease, or they have complicated black lung disease, then I'll actually bring the man in and sit down with him and go over the x-ray with him. And more importantly than that, I'll take a very detailed work history of him. So we have well over probably 1,000 to 2,000 miners with extremely, extremely detailed work histories, the most detailed of anywhere in the world on Central Appalachian miners. So we know what they did, how long they did it, where they were at, what seams they were in, the conditions of the seams, were they Pinnerman, continuous minors, root bowl, whatever they were, we've got it down in the history, and it was important to me to try to find out exactly why we were seeing so much of this and to figure out what was going on. So here's basically a normal x-ray. It's important, I know you guys, but you're not going to have to be doctors to see this stuff. This dark area, that's normal lung. Here's the heart, here's the mediastinum with vessels, so this is a normal x-ray here. In the first study, this is an actual x-ray from our clinic on this individual, and you can see these large areas of conglomerate, big masses within both upper lungs on this individual. This is consistent with a category B complicated black lung disease. And normally when you think of this kind of disease, you think of maybe men in their 60s or 70s, but this is actually on a 45-year-old right here. So that's one of the things that was most concerning. We had 60 cases of complicated black lung disease in that time frame from January 15 to August of 16. More than 75% of them were either Pinnerman or roof bolters or continuous minor operators. So our top 3 jobs that we were seeing the most underground was roof bolters, continuous minor operators, and shuttle car. That was our top 3. On surface, it's either going to be drill men or auger men, or maybe even high wall miners now since that came into effect. Those were our 3 most dangerous on the surface. Let me go back for that. 80% of those men lived in Floyd, not Lester, in Pike County, and as May of 18. So since that time frame, I've had 98 additional cases of PMF in my clinic since August of 2016. So we're well over the 100 cases that Kara just talked about. We're at almost 160, and this changes every day. So in my stack to read, I've probably got 5 more that you can add on to it in the next week or 2. So I'm not seeing PMF once a month, and I'm not seeing PMF once every 2 weeks. It's every single week. We're picking up complicated cases of black lung, new minors with complicated black lung. This is the location that most of them were living in, and that's because I'm right there in Pikeville, so we have the surrounding area. But a lot of the things that I read that's not done at the clinic comes from outside sources. So I read a lot of men that mine in Virginia, and we're so close to the border here. You'll have men from Kentucky that work in Virginia and vice versa. So it's really important to kind of get a feel for where this process is going on. And like I said earlier, here's most of our, we got a double head pinner here, which is roof boulders. Here's a continuous minor, and you can see this is all just dust up here. But these are 2 of our most common occupations that the men actually were showing for complicated black lung disease. I've got 3 x-rays at the end that I want to spend the most time on, but you can see this boy in the middle here. He was diagnosed, I first seen his x-ray in 2015 on a state black lung claim. And he was a category B at that time. He was 35 or 36 years old at that time, and he had been treated for pneumonia off and on for 6 to 9 months. And nobody thought or thought he may have had black lung because he was only 35 to 36 years old. So he went in for his state claim, and at that time, he only had 17 years underground, so less than 20 years underground. He was almost solely a continuous minor operator, and he's got 4 little boys, and his wife's here, and we've been following him since 2015, and I'll show you his x-ray in just a minute. But some of his quotes, no longer provide for his family. The more I talk, the more out of breath I get. And this was explaining a little bit about what I believe and he believed was probably one of the biggest causes was he actually cut the slope down to the mine. So he mined for about 7 to 8 months straight, just cutting pure rock to even get to the seam. So he got to the slope, and that's probably where most of his disease came from, given the rapid progression of it. So that's me and him looking at his x-rays, and he's one that, I come in and I always show him, if it's bad like this, I always go over them with it and show it, because most of them don't get to see their x-rays. Most of them don't know when we say 22A or 23B or 33B. They don't understand what that means. So if you can take them in there and show them a normal x-ray and then show them this x-ray with these big masses, then it kind of gets a hold of how serious the disease actually is for them. The 3 x-rays that I'm going to show you right now is 3 miners that I'm close with. 2 of them I'm really, really close with. This boy actually came in yesterday. He's 4 years older than I am. He's in stage. He's now progressed from a B to a C complicated. These are all big fibrotic masses in both lungs. And he just got sent for a transplant evaluation last week. And the first thing that we see is, and it's important to know about this disease, is once the disease is diagnosed and when we find this disease, there's no cure for it. And all 3 of these men that I'm going to show you were taken out of the mines. But unfortunately, all 3 of them have continued to progress even after they've been out of the mines for years. So once that dust gets in there, and once that dust gets in the lung and it starts causing this disease and this fibrosis, it doesn't matter on a lot of the men if you're taken out or you're not taken out, that dust is still in there and it still can cause this disease and it still can cause it to progress. And that's one of the kind of the devils in this disease is even if you diagnose it and you bring them out of the dust, it's still in there and it's still potential to get worse, and that's one of the big cost burdens also. So when he talked to the transplant people yesterday at UK, the first thing they told him was the statistics for him when he was going in for his transplant, if he decides to have it, if he is a candidate and he finds a match. And we have a disease here that has no cure in a 48-year-old guy with a family. And the first thing they tell him is the statistics of how much chance he has to live after the first year, how much chance he has to live after the second year, and then they give him overall survival for his transplant. So yesterday they told him if he had a double lung transplant, if all that came to fruition, he had a less than 5% chance to live for greater than 5 years. Or he had less than, the average survival is actually less than 5 years for a transplant for minors. So 4 or 3.7 years is our average life expectancy if they get a transplant. So that it's pretty dismal in itself because part of that time you're going to be recovering from surgery, part of that time you're going to be worried about rejection, and the quality of life, even if you get 3 to 5 years, is going to be fairly poor for transplant. So prevention of this disease is by far the most important part of it, of anything we can do is prevention. This individual, continuous miner operator, these are all big, huge conglomerate masses here, both sides. You can see he has a large areas of those are nodules, like Kara was saying, so a lot of silica exposure. This man, last year, it's 68 feet from my x-ray machine to my office. He's 38 years old. He can't walk from the x-ray to my office without stopping and catching his breath. He's also on lung transplant list. I saw him last month, and he's on oxygen 24 hours a day. He can't go anywhere with his family. He can't do anything with his wife, and is worried about even getting a transplant. With less than 5 years survival at 38 years old, they don't even want to risk it, a lot of them. But the quality of life is so poor, some of them will eventually try it. So, extremely aggressive disease and extremely deadly, and it's affecting men in their 30s, 40s. The earliest one we've seen is 29, 28 years old with complicated disease. And it's men that doesn't have to work for 30 or 40 years in there. We're seeing them sometimes less than 10 years with this disease that bad. So it's an epidemic, and it's extremely dangerous disease. This boy is probably one of the worst that I've seen. This is the only little parts of lung that you can see left up here that's recognizable as lung. Here, a little bit down at the bottom, and just a little bit up top. The rest of this, all this white stuff, is all complicated black lung, from top to bottom. Almost his entire, probably 90% of his lungs is completely filled up with this fibrotic mass. This man worked in the mines for about 22 years, continuous miner operator, so less than 25 years. 2 years younger than I am. He's confined to his house on oxygen 24 hours. Can't get outside unless it's usually 60 degrees or cooler and the humidity is down where he can breathe. So we have a lot of older miners, and we have a more aggressive form of the disease now that's attacking our younger minors, and there's multiple causes, and it's a very, very critical time right now in this disease point that we all have to come together and work together to try to solve it, because this is the most critical part, not only for the minors, but for also their families, which are extremely involved. Even more so with our younger men that have younger families which haven't been raised. So it's a very, very critical time, and I really appreciate the state of Virginia with the lawmakers coming, because some of the states haven't taken that objective to try to at least have forums and to get people together to talk about it.
Thanks, Brandon. So the work that we did with Brandon led to a request from members of Congress for NIOSH, the Department of Labor, Office of Workers' Compensation, and HRSA to work together to assess the full burden of PMF in the U.S. NIOSH took the lead on this, and HRSA put out a call to clinics that they fund, asking the clinics to call NIOSH if they were seeing increases in disease. And shortly thereafter that request, we got a call from Mr. Carson. So the call came from this network of Black-owned clinics in Southwest Virginia. The main clinic is here in St. Charles, right down the road from 2 active coal mines and right next to the train tracks that carry cars of coal by daily. We set a similar case definition to what Brandon just described to you. We said that it had to be a case of PMF and a coal miner who received a radiograph from this network of clinics in Western Virginia between January 1, 2013 and February 15, 2017. What we found at Ron's clinic was 416 cases of PMF among minors who visited the clinic for services during that time period. So this work was recently published by the Journal of American Medical Association, or JAMA, and is the largest cluster of PMF ever described in the literature. What we suspect that we are seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. So to conclude here, we continue to investigate and document the scope of this problem and begin to offer additional solutions to prevent future cases. We're looking to bring together administrative and public health databases to get a more comprehensive picture of the total burden of dust-induced lung diseases in minors, including a review of the utility of some of the health protections that are already in place. And we're close to publishing an in-depth case series describing the medical and occupational histories of 19 of those 416 minors that we described in the JAMA article from Ron's clinics. Last year, we started revisiting the hotspots of rapidly progressive disease that were identified in the mid-2000s with our mobile units. So that was the truck, or the large mobile unit that you saw in the picture earlier. And we should be completing that survey in the next year. Still, we remain committed to our long-standing mandated role to administer the Coal Workers Health Surveillance Program per our federal regulations. Though to be honest, contemporary realities have led us to broaden what we deem to be surveillance, because we can't ignore everything else that's going on around us. As scientists, we are unable to turn a blind eye to this situation, and frankly, as human beings and members of the communities where this is taking place, we will not stop doing what we are doing, and we will continue unabated until our efforts are no longer needed. So with that, I will thank you, and I encourage you to come to our breakout session, which will be at 3 o'clock in room 108, and we'll talk about the public health trends and prevention.
Give NIOSH another hand. We're going to ask you not to leave the room. We are going to set up about about 5 minutes for the minor interview. So if you want to stretch your legs for a second or two, that would be fine, but stay in the room about 5 minutes.
So I am Teresa Burris, and I'm the chair of Appalachian Studies at Radford University. And I'm going to be talking with Bethel Brock this afternoon. And he is going to tell you about himself based on some of these beginning questions that I have for him. And so just to start us off, if you'll just tell us where you were born and raised and your family's relationship to coal mining.
Well, I was born and raised in Wise County, North Virginia, and have been there all my life. And my father worked in a coal mine, and the company doctor asked him to stop the coal mine because of his lungs were beginning to show signs of black lung. And then my great-grandfather was a coal miner also.
So how old were you, Bethel, when you started mining, and how did you get started working in the coal, and how many years did you work in coal?
Yeah, well, my father, in 1957, I started, or 55, excuse me, I started working with my father at age 15, and so that you won't think I'm completely illiterate, I went back to college after I was 60 years old and got a bachelor's degree for U.S. government.
Here at UVA Wise, right?
Yes, here at UVA Wise, so, and what's the other question?
So you were 15 when you started. How many years did you actually work in coal?
Oh, I worked about 34 years, but records show 32 because my father didn't record anything about my work for him in his mind. It might have been a shame he's working me so young, but I was good with it. But anyway, the last 27 years was Westmoreland Coal Company in Virginia operations at the Wentz Complex. This, in fact, if I may, I'll show my, I don't think you can see it, this is the complex of Wentz coal mine and coal preparation plant where I spent all of my time for Westmoreland.
So what were some of the positions that you worked in the mines?
Well, I began as utility in the face area on the midnight shift in 1968, and I did virtually everything in the mine. I ran roof bolter, miner, then shuttle car, and did some repair work, welding, and then I went on to the prep plant, the leather part. I worked there, operating the prep plant.
And you went to that later position because you had already been diagnosed with simple black lung, is that correct?
Yeah, and thank God for NIOSH. I think I would probably be on oxygen now had it not been for NIOSH and a program where that you can, I became a Part 90 miner. That means you have a letter that you can go to list us the area of the operation. If you're a Part 90 miner, that enabled me to bid on the job and have kind of super seniority. And so I think, you know, that was a much less dusty job I went to by that means.
So once you were diagnosed with simple black lung, talk about the process for obtaining your benefits. How long did it take you? What was involved in that journey?
Well, in 2003, I had a DOL exam filed for a claim, federal claim, and they sent me to Dr. Rasmussen over in West Virginia. My lawyer did, and he examined me, finding a complicated black lung with me in 2003. So then the Department of Labor put me in interim pay for a year before the company was able to get an appeal to fight the case, and they got Dr. Wheeler, a doctor that has denied 1,500 minors. And he said he never saw a complicated case in his life. And so they went on his report that overrode my doctor's report, and so I lost the case. Then after that, I went on and filed an appeal again. And finally, over the years, as I was denied on appeals, I couldn't overcome the company's doctor's reports. So then I went on to, I finally said, well, we might as well just start modifying the case instead of appealing, because appeals are a lot longer, harder process, and slower. But you can go and get another doctor's report on modification, and as soon as it shows a change in conditions, and the Department of Labor are sympathetic with you about your case, then that didn't happen over the years until in 2017 when I filed again, and Dr. Kathleen DuPont found that my opacity, which was originally 1 centimeter, she found it to be 12 millimeters, which is, of course, 2 millimeters larger than had to be complicated. So then we filed that with my lawyer, Jeremy O'Quinn, and we had, so that enabled the company, that opened the door for the company to send me to a doctor as well. So then I went to the company doctor in Pike, Kentucky, Dr. Rosenberg, and he found me complicated. So after that, you know, then the strange thing happened. The claims examiner for the Department of Labor had found that I was disabled and disabled me, and so then she, after like the time lapse that the company could appeal, I think it would offer evidence for defense for their case. They did not do that for all that time, and then I mean the case was closed really technically, but she turns around and she says, I've reversed my opinion.
This was the Department of Labor representative.
Claim examiner, yes. And so I said, I told my lawyer, what's going on here? You know, and he said, I don't know, we got to find out. And he asked her why she made such a rational decision. And she said, well, I couldn't find the date of the x-ray on the film. So then my doctor explained to her, look, you have to hold the light. We're starting to put the dates inside, it's embedded in the x-ray film. So hold it up to the light. But she still stuck with her guns, and I didn't get it. So
About that time, though, Inside Climate News came to talk to you.
That's what I started to say. Steve Sanders, attorney in Wattsburg, Kentucky, called me and he said, are you willing to do an interview with a news reporter? I said, yeah. So go ahead and tell him. So he called me and he said, Dave Heschmeyer from Inside Climate News, he wanted to come to see me. I said, come on down and he was from San Diego, California. And so he came down and spent a couple of days with me and brought a photographer. And we went through and made a story. So then he says, I'm going to speak to the Department of Labor claims examiner. And she wouldn't talk to him. She said, you know, medical records are protected with privacy. So I said, that's okay. I'll sign off on that. So I emailed her, signed off, and then the director took over for Department of Labor, and she said, we made a mistake. So they approved me, and I was able to get my benefits then within 2 more months. Westmoreland never contested. But also another event was that backing up to where we got the report from Dr. Rosenberg, then the company didn't submit you're supposed to share all of your evidence you have, or even if it's not entered as evidence, if it's, something about the minor's exam report. So it wasn't submitted, and so that's why that I knew it was on my favor, because they would have submitted if it had been in their favor. So that's how I found that, and we told the claims examiner, look, the company has got, their doctor is okayed it, has given me complicated, but we went around and around and.
Well, and so you had even said that sometimes this was unusual because given that both the minor's doctor and the company's doctor have to submit a report on the minor's lungs, why do discrepancies exist between these reports? Do you have?
I don't know why they, I was failed by the coal company, and God knows I thank God for much more coal company. It enabled me to raise a family, and all coal miners appreciate it. I appreciate them for being signatories to UMWA contract. It was very beneficial to me. But when you go and when you see that they're turning a blind eye to black lung and the dust and suspension in the mine all the time, that's the bad part about them. But we just then I went on, and so my company was found I believe my company, I was told, was tampered with dust samples where they run the dust samples on you. We would wear this dust sampler for 8 hours a day, and then when it would go in, it would pass. We could understand how it could pass because we knew we were working in extensive amounts of float dust and rock dust. So we learned later that it had been the lab looked at the samples and they said, something wrong here. They could see they'd been tampered with somehow. But then they said, well, we'll have to send MSHA out. So when the MSHA inspector comes to sample me, he comes up to my boss and he says, I'm going to sample Brock today. He says, he's not going to be on this drill today. He's going to be over here in the fresh air building the practice. So MSHA failed me too, because the inspector was not supposed to allow that to happen, but he did. And then I went out and DOL failed me. But you can call fake news all you want to, but Inside Climate News is what got my benefits for me. They would not have backed up if I had exposed them to media.
So then that just points out, if all the other miners out there who don't have Inside Climate News investigating their cases, what is happening?
That's what I wonder about.
So you mentioned the UMWA. Are there differences in union mines versus non-union mines in terms of what's happening with black lung and the testing and all of that? Or is there no difference?
I can tell you this, that with UMWA you have a right to a safe and healthy workplace. You can withdraw yourself from an area that is not safe or healthy. So when I set up my drill to roof bolt the place, the boss put the miner on the other side of me on the fresh air side, and that puts all the dust right in me, my face. And I said, I'm not going to work in this dust. You got something else you want me to do, I'll do it, but not this. And so they couldn't fire me because, in fact, in reality, they did try to fire me. They had an excuse for something else they used. But, you know, the UMWA, you know, they saved the job. I mean, if I'd have been in a non-union mine, one time I told them I would work in it, I'd be going home. But I appreciate it.
So you mentioned the dust sampling and the issues around that, and when we talked before, you said that like for over 40 years, there's been kind of this false sense of security with dust sampling. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, in fact, I have filed a case on dust samples. These dust companies are paying claims for miners with complicated black lung because we wore the dust respirators. But when I first began working in the mine at age 28, I told my mine foreman, I said, you know, we have an awful lot of dust to breathe in there. We're going to die with black lung. He said, don't move. He went over to the supply house and brought me a respirator. He said, wear this and you'll never get black lung. So we wore them religiously, but, you know, unfortunately, the filters didn't do what they thought they would. So the fine dust goes on through the filters and you breathe it in. So, you know, we were failed again right there.
Well, just recently there was a big lawsuit in Kentucky, eastern Kentucky, with the filters. They claimed that the company did not produce successful filters.
Well, it's, you know, the idea is you tell a man that this is going to do the job, and so that you can get production, and so that you can produce production with dust everywhere, then, yeah, it's kind of like punitive damages in law, you know. They gain from their loss of their health, you know.
Will you talk about what life is like for you living with black lung?
Well, it's tougher, you know. Yeah, I can't walk up a hill much, and I have like category A in my confusion, and they're just different things you see. I mean, sometimes I'll wake up smothering, and I'm dreaming of being in a mine and seeing all this dust, you know. But it's emotional, you know, to you. But sometimes my wife will say, she'll say, well, you going to answer me? But I'm trying to breathe back in to feel my lungs so I'll hard answer with. That happens sometimes. It's frustrating. But, you know, and probably with the progression of this disease, the way it progresses over the years, you don't know what your future is. It only gets worse. But I've really been blessed. I don't have, and like I said, with an OSH, helping me get out of the dust, I think it's caused me to be less impaired as I am.
And I know that based on what Brandon was saying, and I was talking to Charlie early outside here, that the weather makes a difference too. With if it's hot and humid.
Yeah, I try to work my vegetable garden sometimes, and when it's hot, I tell you can't work for about a minute.
So, from your perspective now, Bethel, what would you like other miners, active miners, to know? What advice do you have for them?
Well, I would like for active miners to be wise and take care of their health, do their best to work in as little dust as humanly possible, and refuse to work in excessive amounts of dust. I know, but if miners stick together, they can accomplish anything. You know, that's why the UMWA has prevailed. Like to have because we stuck together. You know, there's power in numbers. But if you just give in and say, well, you know, I'm gonna get fired if I don't work in this desk, well, you're sacrificing your lungs. And I told my boss once, he said, well, Bill works in this desk. I said, yes, but these are my lungs, and I'm gonna try to take care of them.
So we also have some politicians, representatives in the audience. And even though, as Kara pointed out, this history of the laws that exist that are there to protect minors, obviously we have a resurgence, and we saw those very shocking graphs. What would you like to tell policymakers and politicians? What's your message to them?
Well, I would like for them to do everything possible to pass laws to help aid minors, and especially prevention is far more important than get the benefits I get. I would rather be healthy and not have any benefits. But you know, if the conditions in mines, I mean, you know, there has to be a way to stop this. And every time that they come up with a new way to sample or to prevent or monitor this in the mine, they find a way to get around it. The companies find a way to get around it. And, you know, they need to be ways researched and learned about how to make the miner safe or he can work in clean air. You know, even the manufacturers of equipment could do more. But the politicians have the power to change the law, and the law is what's hurting. And as far as benefits, when a miner applies for his benefits, he gets denied because he passes this test that they give him. And you know, you can pass that test, you're still not able to go back. The law says if you're able to go back to the last coal mine job you did, then, you know, you're able. But if you're not, you're disabled. But if I went back, me or thousands of other miners went back to their old job, they would find they could work maybe 15 minutes or less, and they'll sit down, because you'll sit down or your legs will drop you one, because you cannot go back. The standards that they have for passing the test is far inadequate. I mean, the company is not going to let you sit down and rest every few minutes. You won't be there long. So that don't mean that you can go back and do the job.
And so part of this then is also not just the laws, but the enforcement of the laws and policies.
We found very lax enforcement with MSHA, has been my experience. I don't know, it's been a few years since I worked, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's similar to the way it was then.
So, given that the media is here, and there are going to be folks, as Jim mentioned, there are going to be folks who are going to be watching this, reading about this whole day today. What do you want the rest of America, the rest of the world, to know about Central Appalachian coal mining, coal miners, health, safety?
Well, it just needs new laws and more protection. I've heard that they have this new dust monitor at Miners Word that it's unique in itself. But I've heard that they even take it off the miner operator and put it on a miner that's going to be in clean air. I hear that's going around now, and that is utterly ridiculous. But that's the way they're getting around it.
So we have a few minutes, and what I want to do is open it up to the audience if you all have questions for Bethel. And I don't think we have a mic that goes around, but if you'll just let me know, and then I can repeat it in the mic. Does anybody have questions that that you would like to ask or comments? Oh, yes, go ahead.
So just speak up.
Yes.
Hi, my name is David from NIOSH. I'm just curious what your experience was like when you decided you wanted to take your Part 90 letter and claim your Part 90 rights. Can you talk a little bit about the experience that you had with your coworkers and with your company when you decided to make that move?
Yes,
Do you want to repeat that?
I think it was about 1990.
Repeat the question on the mic just so that we have it. So let me repeat the question just for so it's in the mic. The question was, what happened when you got your
Well, so, and for the sake of the audience, the Part 90
Part
rights
90.
are, so it's a legal right to transfer to a less dusty position if you have early stage black lung.
Yeah, well, the first time I got x-ray from Knowledge, they found that I didn't have any signs of black lung. So then which time, by the way, I stopped smoking cigarettes. I smoked for a few years and I said, you know, these things, I've got to stop. So I did, and this was, you know, after that they had said I was clear. Then when I went, and a few years later I did another DOSH x-ray, and it showed that I was impaired, that I had some dust. And the thing about it that helped me was to be able to go to a clear dust area. Well, what I did was I waited until a job came open. I mean, actually, I had to watch the company would kind of arrange jobs where people they wanted to be there. So I had to kind of trick them. So I hid my litter and my files at home. So then a job came open. I went to the super and I said, I'm going to bid on this job. He said, yes, but Donnie is a Part 90 minor. I said, well, I am too. He said, just bring me your letter and I'll, you know, you got the job. Because I have real seniority over him too. So I mean, I hated to do that to Donnie, but Donnie's a good man, but he was in less dust then at that time than I was. So I wanted to move on. So it enabled me to move to a better job.
How did your other colleagues respond to you? Did they have any reactions when you got your letter and then asked to be moved? Did you get any?
Yeah, all of my fellow workers respected the fact that I got the job because, you know, that I had the letter.
Any other questions? Yes.
First of all, I commend your persistence. What advice would you give other minors who continue to get denied?
So the question is, what advice would Bethany give minors who continue to be denied their benefits?
Well, you know, you don't want to give up. If you keep going every year or so and get a new DOL exam, DOL will let you go once a year after you've been denied. It shows a pattern of progression, and which was my case. You can see the difference every year, just like Dr. DuPont looked at my x-ray years ago and she found 1 centimeter. Then later on she found 12 millimeters. It grew. It is a progressive disease, and you can't ever lose sight on the fact that black lung is a progressive disease. It don't get better, it gets worse. And then if you've got a paper trail of where you went to the doctor for these exams and keep that, you know, that goes on record with the Department of Labor, then you've got a better chance with your case.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bethel, do you think the change in the law, the 2014 change, is strong enough? You think that'll make a difference?
So the question was if the 2014 law, the Byrd Amendment, is that right?
Well, the DOL, the change in the dust standards, and also the,
Is
yeah.
strong.
I don't think it made a nickel's worth of change, because, you know, they just turn right around and find some way to get around. They found a way to get around the dust standard, and make it pass. That's just all we were studying. Marcia?
Yes, Marcia.
What would you like to see change about the law to help minors get their benefits? You said that the test that was done was inadequate to determine the true depth of your disease. What would you like to see changed?
Well, I'd like to see the difference in FEV1 and the other blood gases. They have to be too high. You know, I mean, a minor, they're too low. A minor needs them to be higher because mining is a labor-intense job. You don't just go into mines with impaired lungs and produce a day's work like the company expects you to produce. They want you, in fact, if they could, they'd like to hire you at age 18 and fire you at age 40, most companies. Because that's when you're in your livelihood, you're able to do more work. That's how it goes.
Well, and as Brandon showed, as early as 38, well, and you said 29 was the youngest with PMF, right? So that lifespan is even shorter.
But the Byrd Amendment was one of the best things to ever happen to black lung law because, you know, so many times X-ray did not reveal the dust that's in a miner's lung, yet he's still impaired with his breathing. Then we were fighting to try. I did a few claims myself. I worked for 8 years for a lawyer for black lung, and you know, it's just different.
Well, in the Byrd Amendment, you want to talk about the 15-year presumption?
Well, with that, yeah, I missed my point. Now, if you have a clear X-ray, if you've got 15 years from then, then it's assumed by law that you are disabled because your condition is caused by black lung, and that you do, you know, have black lung, even though the X-ray didn't show it, because it's common sense, really. And then for years, we had to file claims for widows after their husband died, who was on lifetime benefits when he died. But, you know, why would you have to prove the case again? You proved it once. Then they want you to prove. That's where the new Byrd law really hits the spot.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
I would like to invite you, I'm Paula Hill with the Health Radio, this is Rachel Hilton. We need our patients motivated because we have so many of our coal miners, and to be honest, they have given up. They have tried and they feel beat down by the system. Because as you said, you know, you go and we evaluate you, we send you to another attorney, and you know, you go to another physician, and they say, oh no, it's not bad enough, and then they're afraid that if they do get the benefits, they'll be taken away. But you were resilient, and we would love for you to come and talk to our patients. We can get you a group together because we have difficulty getting our patients to apply for their benefits because they feel beaten down by the system.
So the point was, and this is something I know that just because I'm married to Jim Worth, they are, the black lung clinics at Stone Mountain are trying to develop peers, like community health workers, to your very point, to be a cheering squad, to say don't give up. And that was your advice to the miners, right? To not give up.
Yes.
But sometimes I think it's a lonely process, and to have other miners encouraging would be helpful.
I find so many miners that say, I give up, like you can't win black lung. But they might be real close to getting them, you know, to being approved. They might be closer than they think. Because it seems like X-rays, they don't show anything for a long time, and then all of a sudden they will. Now, my case, my personal case, my blood gases are still pretty good because I worked in a less dusty area, I guess. But the law says if you have an opacity 1 centimeter or larger, it's assumed the law that you're disabled of black lung. That's how my case went. That's why I got disability, was because I have an opacity, a spot larger than a centimeter.
So with that, I think that we'll, oh, I'm sorry, one more question.
I'll be quick. Bethel, can you talk about the new group that you formed here in Norton?
So the question was for Bethel to talk about the new group that he's formed in Norton,
Which might be an answer to the
health wagons question. Oh, did you start a new group here in Norton?
Oh, yeah, we started, I helped start a group over in McKinnon County and, of a Black Lung chapter, they call it Chapter 1, Black Lung Association, and of course we belong to the national too, but I'm starting one in Norton now, and we've had one meeting already, and we've had good participation, and we're asking a lot of miners to come out. I have hope that we will be able to grow pretty good size there, and when we get the voice out to the politicians and everybody to try to do something to help miners with this epidemic. I mean, this is ridiculous. You look at this and you see all these miners with complicated black lung. You know something's not working now.
Well,
It's bad.
going back to Kara's graphs, I mean, that sharp increase is just startling. So if anybody is interested in getting information about the Black Lung chapter, they should see Bethel or who else? Charlie here up front, and they will share information about where they're meeting and when they'll be meeting again.
Yeah, we meet the first Tuesday in every month at 3 o'clock at Norton Community Center.
There you go. Thank you, Bethel.
So just a couple of quick announcements. I think it must pay to have the chancellor be part of your event because for the session that was upstairs, the benefits counseling session that was upstairs at the end of the day has been moved to room 109, so nobody needs to use the stairs. So if you're, so thanks to the chancellor for that. We also just want to thank again Margie Toman from Healthy Appalachia Institute. Without her, this wouldn't have happened, so please thank Margie. And thanks to Rosa and Becca for all their hard work with the AV. Really appreciate it. So we will, at 3 o'clock, we'll resume with the quality of life session in here, the medical, x-ray, and legal session for professionals out in the auditorium, and the public health session down the hall that way. And that's also where the bathrooms are, that direction. And there should be drinks out front. Thank you, everybody.